You don't feel fulfilled even when everything is going well. The feeling you were never supposed to have. You did everything right. You followed the plan. You put in the work. You reached the places you once only dreamed about. And somewhere along the way, without warning, without reason, you stopped feeling the way you expected to feel. Not devastated, not broken, not even sad in a way that makes sense. Just absent, like someone turned down the volume on your own life and you cannot find the dial. You look at what you have built and you wait. You wait for the wave of satisfaction that was supposed to come with the job, the relationship, the stability, the recognition. You wait for the moment when your chest fills with the kind of warmth that justifies everything. And the moment does not come. Instead, there is a quiet, persistent hollowness that sits inside you like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. You go through the motions. You show up. You smile at the right times. And beneath all of it, something in you is watching the performance with a kind of tired detachment, wondering when the real feeling is going to arrive. The most disorienting part is that you have no permission to feel this way. That is the cruelest part of this particular kind of emptiness. When everything looks fine, when people around you would trade places with you without hesitation, when your problems are the kind of problems others call blessings, you are not allowed to name what you feel. So you push it down. You call it ingratitude. You call it overthinking. You tell yourself to be grateful, to focus, to stop being dramatic. And for a moment it works. Until the quiet returns, until you are alone again. And the silence between you and your own life feels wider than it should. Most people never talk about this. Not because they do not feel it, but because it does not fit into the accepted categories of human suffering. There is no word for the grief of a life that looks whole but feels hollow. There is no social script for standing in the middle of everything you worked for and feeling like a stranger inside it. And so people carry it privately, this particular ache, tucking it underneath the performance of being fine, wondering in their quietest moments whether something is fundamentally wrong with them that no one else seems to share. But this feeling has a name. It has roots, it has reasons. And more than anything else, it has a meaning that most people spend their entire lives running from because they are afraid that if they stop and look at it directly, they will find something terrifying. What they find instead, when they finally have the courage to look, is not destruction. It is clarity. It is the beginning of something they could never have built while they were too busy performing their own lives to actually live them. What you are feeling is not random. It is not ingratitude. It is not weakness. It is an intelligence, a signal rising from the deepest part of who you are, asking you one question that no achievement, no relationship, no external validation has ever been designed to answer. The question is not, what do you want? The question is, who are you, underneath everything you were told to become? That is the question this video was made to help you sit with, not to solve it quickly, not to replace it with a better feeling thought, but to finally stop running from it and discover that the answer has been inside you the entire time, waiting with a patience that is almost unbearable. Because the life you are looking for is not somewhere ahead of you. It never was. And the emptiness you have been trying to escape is, as you will come to understand, the most important message your inner life has ever sent you. This is where the journey begins. Not at the moment of crisis, not at the moment of loss, but at this strange and uncomfortable threshold you are standing at right now. The threshold of a life that looks exactly right, and a soul that is quietly, persistently telling you that something is missing. Something is. But it is not what you think. The finish line that moved. There is a moment that almost everyone has experienced, and almost no one talks about honestly. The moment right after the thing you wanted finally arrives. The promotion, the relationship, the house, the number on the scale, the milestone that was supposed to change everything. For a few days, maybe even a few weeks, something feels different. There is a lightness, a sense of forward movement, a quiet satisfaction that whispers, "You did it." And then it doesn't. And then you are back to baseline, scanning the horizon for the next thing that will finally do what this last thing couldn't. This is not a personal failure. This is a biological mechanism so deeply embedded in the human brain that neuroscientists gave it a name: hedonic adaptation. Your nervous system is designed, with extraordinary precision, to normalize. Whatever you achieve, whatever you acquire, whatever changes in your external circumstances, the brain absorbs it, files it as the new normal, and returns to its previous emotional set point. Joy is metabolized, satisfaction evaporates, and you are left standing in the middle of your upgraded life, feeling exactly the same as you did before. Not ungrateful, not broken, just adapted, reset, already reaching for what comes next. The truth is that this mechanism evolved to keep you alive, not to keep you happy. A brain that was permanently satisfied with what it had would stop striving, stop scanning for threats, stop seeking improvement. From a survival standpoint, contentment is dangerous. From a human standpoint, it means that the emotional rewards you were promised for achieving your goals are structurally, neurologically incapable of lasting the way you expected them to. The system was never designed for arrival. It was designed for continuation. But here is what makes this particularly painful in the modern world. No one told you. You were handed a set of goals and promised that reaching them would feel like arrival. You were shown images of people whose smiles widened as their lives improved. You were given a cultural story in which effort leads to achievement, and achievement leads to fulfillment. A clean, linear equation that your lived experience keeps disproving over and over again in ways that feel like personal failure rather than biological design. Every time the feeling fades after a win, you conclude that you did not win enough, that the next one will be different, that the problem is the size of the goal, not the nature of the mechanism. The finish line does not disappear because you are doing something wrong. It moves because that is what finish lines do. The problem was never your ambition, your discipline, or your capacity to feel. The problem was the map you were given, a map drawn by a society that confused the accumulation of things with the cultivation of meaning, and passed that confusion down to you as wisdom. What this means is both devastating and liberating. Devastating because no external acquisition will ever permanently fill what you are trying to fill. Liberating because the thing you have been looking for was never located outside of you to begin with. And once you understand that, truly understand it not just intellectually but in your bones, the entire strategy of your life has the chance to change. There is something deeper beneath the chase. Something you have been sprinting past for years. And the emptiness you feel when the finish line moves again is not telling you to run faster. It is telling you to stop. Turn around. Look inward. What you have been searching for in every goal, every achievement, every moment of external recognition is not more success. It is contact. Contact with yourself. Contact with the deeper current of meaning that runs beneath the surface of your days. And that is something no finish line was ever designed to give you. But it is something you are entirely capable of finding. Once you stop looking in the wrong direction. The life you inherited. Think for a moment about the goals you have been working toward. The version of success you have been building. The kind of life you have been trying to create. Now ask yourself a question that most people never dare to ask. Where did those goals come from? Not in the abstract. Specifically, whose voice was it that first told you what a good life looks like? Whose definition of success did you absorb before you were old enough to form your own? Whose fear of failure became the engine of your ambition without you ever consciously choosing it? The uncomfortable truth is that most people are living according to a script they did not write. They are pursuing versions of success, happiness, and meaning that were handed to them by parents, by culture, by the particular neighborhood or social class or religion they grew up inside. These definitions arrived early, when the brain was still soft and impressionable, when love and belonging felt contingent on becoming a certain kind of person. And so you became that person. You became very good at it. You built the life you were supposed to build. And now you are standing inside it wondering why it doesn't feel like yours. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing this. It is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It is the quiet, persistent feeling that you are somehow a guest in your own existence, that the person living your life is a very convincing version of you, shaped by everyone who ever had an opinion about who you should be, but not quite you. Not the you that existed before the opinions arrived. Not the you that surfaces in rare, unguarded moments, in music that stops your breath, in conversations that feel like coming home, in the moments between sleep and waking when the performance briefly falls away and something older and truer takes its place, even if only for a few seconds. Most people never question the life they inherited because questioning it feels like ingratitude or rebellion. If the people who shaped you loved you, if their intentions were good, then rejecting their vision of success feels like rejecting them. And so the questioning goes underground. It surfaces as restlessness, as low-level dissatisfaction, as the persistent sense that something important is missing, something you cannot name because you have never been allowed to name it. It surfaces as the feeling, on ordinary Tuesday afternoons, that you are performing a role in a play you never auditioned for and cannot find the exit of. But here is what psychology has consistently found. Fulfillment does not come from executing someone else's vision of a good life. It comes from aligning your daily choices with your own values, your own sense of meaning, your own deepest nature. When those two things, the life you are living and the self who is living it, are out of alignment, no amount of success can bridge the gap. The disconnection you feel is not evidence of ingratitude. It is evidence of authenticity trying to break through. The life you inherited was not given to you with malice. It was given to you by people who were also living inherited lives, passing forward the only map they knew. The question is not whether to condemn that map. The question is whether you are willing to stop following it long enough to draw your own. And that begins with something terrifying, something almost no one does voluntarily. It begins with asking what you actually want, when no one is watching, when no one is grading you, when the approval has been removed from the equation entirely. What remains when all of that is stripped away is not nothing. It is you. It has always been you, and it has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to finally ask. The art of performing happiness. There is a version of yourself that the world sees, composed, capable, put together. The person who responds to, "How are you?" with something appropriate, something that does not make the other person uncomfortable, something that fits neatly inside the social contract. And there is the person who exists after the conversation ends, in the car on the way home, in the quiet of the bathroom before bed, in the 5 seconds between closing the laptop and needing to open it again. Most people live the majority of their emotional life in the gap between those two versions of themselves. And most people have no idea how much energy that gap consumes. We learn to perform happiness before we learn to feel it. This is not a modern phenomenon, but it has reached a particular intensity in a world where the performance has a platform. Social media did not create the tendency to project fulfillment we don't possess. It industrialized it. It gave us an audience, a metric, a visible record of how convincingly we are playing the role of someone whose life is working. And in doing so, it deepened the split between the self we present and the self we inhabit. The performance became not just social but architectural, built into the daily structure of how we move through the world. The performance is exhausting in ways that are difficult to articulate. Not the big performances, those are obvious and temporary. It is the small daily performance of being fine, of being enthusiastic, of being the version of yourself that people expect and reward, that wears you down in ways that look invisible from the outside, but feel unbearable from the inside. By the time you sit down at the end of the day, you are not tired from what you did. You are tired from who you had to be. You are tired from the constant management of how you appear, to colleagues, to family, to the carefully curated version of yourself that exists online, while the actual experience of being you remained unattended, somewhere in the background, waiting for a moment of privacy that rarely comes. What this performance costs the soul is presence, real, unfiltered, unperformed presence in your own life. When you are always managing how you appear, to others, to yourself, to the imagined audience in your head that judges every thought and feeling, you lose the ability to actually be somewhere. You are always slightly outside your own experience, watching it, curating it, making sure it looks acceptable, and the things that cannot be curated, the hollow ache, the inexplicable sadness, the longing you cannot explain, get pushed to the very edge of your awareness, where they accumulate in silence, growing heavier and more insistent with every year they go unaddressed. There is a reason why the most honest conversations of your life have happened in unexpected places, not at planned gatherings, not in the spaces where the performance is explicitly required, but in the spaces where the performance accidentally fell away. In a car at night, in the middle of an argument that broke something open, in a moment of exhaustion so complete that the mask simply stopped fitting. In those moments, something real surfaces, something that doesn't know how to perform. And it is almost always met when another person is present with a recognition that is almost painful in its intensity. Because the other person feels it too. They have always felt it. They were just performing too. The performance is not dishonesty. It is armor. And like all armor, it was built to protect something real and tender underneath. The question worth sitting with is not how to destroy the armor. That would leave you exposed in ways that are not useful. The question is, what would happen if you put it down, not for the world, but for yourself? What would you find beneath the performance of a life that is going well? The answer is not the catastrophe you fear. It is the beginning of contact with your own reality, raw, unedited, imperfect, and entirely yours. And that contact, however uncomfortable it feels at first, is the only foundation on which anything genuinely fulfilling can be built. When the body stopped speaking, there is a kind of intelligence that lives below the neck, and most people spend their adult lives systematically ignoring it. Not because they decided to, but because everything in modern life rewards the mind and has very little use for the body as a source of knowing. You are praised for your thoughts, your productivity, your ability to process and analyze and deliver. You are almost never praised for knowing, without words, that something is wrong. You are almost never rewarded for the quiet wisdom that arrives not as a thought but as a sensation, a knowing that precedes language and outlasts logic. The body is the oldest storyteller you have. Before language existed, before concepts and categories and the ability to explain yourself to others, the body was already communicating. A tightening in the chest when something isn't right. A sudden exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. A persistent low-level tension that lives in the shoulders, the jaw, the space behind the sternum. A feeling of aliveness, brief, surprising, unearned, that appears in certain conversations, certain places, certain moments of genuine contact with the world. These are not random physiological events, they are communications. They are the body's version of language, older than any word you have ever spoken. But something happens to most people, usually early in life, that begins to sever the connection between the mind and the body. The feelings that were inconvenient, the sadness, the anger, the fear, the longing, were either punished or ignored often enough that the nervous system learned to suppress them before they could fully surface. The child who cried and was told not to be sensitive. The teenager who felt things deeply and was told to calm down. The adult who learned that efficiency meant moving through emotions quickly, filing them under manageable categories, and returning to function as soon as possible. Each time a feeling was overridden without acknowledgement, the channel narrowed a little more. Over time, the channel through which the body communicates begins to feel like static. You are still receiving the signals, the tightness, the fatigue, the disconnection, but they have been downgraded to noise rather than information, and so you continue moving through your days in your head, making decisions based on logic and obligation and what you are supposed to want, while the most honest part of you sends messages you have learned not to read. You become highly functional and deeply unaware of your own inner life at the same time. And the gap between those two things is precisely where the emptiness lives. This is why fulfillment can feel so abstract, because fulfillment is not a thought. It is not a conclusion you reach after analyzing your circumstances and finding them satisfactory. It is a felt sense, a quality of aliveness that is experienced in the body before it is understood by the mind. It is the difference between knowing intellectually that your life is going well and feeling, in your chest and your gut and the backs of your hands, that you are actually alive inside it. Reconnecting with the body is not a retreat from intelligence. It is an expansion of it. The body knows things the mind cannot access. It knows whether you are in the right room, whether a relationship is real, whether the path you are on is yours or borrowed. It knew these things long before your mind was able to form the question. And it has been trying to tell you, in every tightening and every hollow ache and every moment of inexplicable emptiness, something that no external circumstance has ever been able to communicate, that the life you are looking for is not somewhere ahead of you. It is something you can only feel by being fully present in the body you are already living in. That is not a small realization. For many people, it is the beginning of everything. The hunger beneath the hunger. When Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps and wrote about what kept people alive in conditions designed to destroy the human spirit, he was not talking about physical strength. He was talking about meaning. He observed something that has since been confirmed by decades of psychological research. Human beings can endure almost anything when they believe their suffering has a purpose, and they can collapse in the midst of comfort and safety when they feel that their lives do not. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It is one of the most important findings in the history of psychology, and it applies, with uncomfortable precision, to the experience you are having right now. This is the hunger beneath the hunger, not the hunger for success, for pleasure, for security, for love, though all of those hungers are real. Beneath them, older and more persistent and far less frequently addressed, is the hunger for meaning. The need to feel that your existence matters, that what you do connects to something larger than the accumulation of days, that there is a thread running through your life that gives it coherence and direction and weight. Without that thread, even a life full of beautiful things can feel like a collection of disconnected episodes, pleasant enough individually, but adding up to something that refuses to feel whole. The tragedy of modern life is that it has become extraordinarily sophisticated at satisfying the surface hungers while leaving the deepest one almost entirely unaddressed. You can have a career that pays exceptionally well and provides zero sense of meaning. You can have a social life that looks rich from the outside and feel completely unknown inside it. You can have comfort, safety, beauty, entertainment, convenience, all of the things the surface hunger reaches for, and still wake at 3 a.m. with the feeling that your life is somehow passing you by, that you are present in the logistics of your existence but absent from its soul. Most people do not recognize this as a hunger for meaning, because it does not announce itself that way. It announces itself as boredom, as restlessness, as the inability to stay present, as the feeling that nothing quite satisfies even when everything is technically satisfying. It announces itself as the hollow feeling that follows an achievement that was supposed to feel significant. It announces itself as the strange grief of a Sunday afternoon, when the week's obligations have paused, and there is nothing to do, and the silence feels like an accusation. These are not symptoms of depression. They are symptoms of a soul that has been underfed the one thing it cannot live without. What you are actually hungry for is not more. It is depth. It is the experience of being in contact with something that feels genuinely real, a conversation that goes somewhere true, a piece of work that feels like an expression of who you actually are, a relationship in which you are known rather than admired, a moment of stillness in which your existence stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a fact. The hunger for meaning cannot be satisfied by achievement. This is not a spiritual opinion. It is a psychological finding. The research consistently shows that people who pursue intrinsic goals organized around growth, authentic expression, and genuine connection, report significantly higher well-being than those who pursue extrinsic goals organized around status, wealth, or approval, even when the extrinsic goals are fully achieved. The numbers are unambiguous. The mechanism is clear. And yet the culture continues to sell the extrinsic path as the one that leads to a full life. You have been hungry for a long time. Not for more of what you already have. For something different entirely. Something that only becomes visible when you are willing to sit with the emptiness long enough to hear what it is actually asking for. And what it is asking for is not complicated, even though it feels impossibly difficult to reach. It is asking for a life that feels at the level of daily experience, true, not optimized, not impressive, not approved of, true. That single word contains everything the hunger has ever been trying to reach. The mirror you never put down. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from what you have done, but from the constant, involuntary act of measuring. Measuring where you are against where you thought you would be. Measuring your life against the lives being lived around you. Measuring the version of yourself you are against the version you believe you should have become by now. This is the exhaustion of the comparing mind, and it is one of the most effective guarantors of permanent dissatisfaction ever devised. It does not announce itself as suffering. It announces itself as motivation, as standards, as the reasonable desire to do better. And underneath all of those respectable names, it quietly empties every moment of the weight it could have carried. Comparison is not a moral failing. It is a deeply wired cognitive function. The brain assesses relative position as a form of social navigation. Where do I stand? What do I have? What am I missing compared to those around me? In small, temporary doses, this serves a purpose. As a constant, ambient background hum to daily experience, it is corrosive. It transforms every achievement into a stepping stone towards something not yet reached, every good thing into evidence of what is still lacking, every moment of genuine satisfaction into a setup for the next round of measurement. Social media has turned this mechanism into something relentless. The curated lives you scroll through are not real lives. They are the highlight reels of real lives, the moments that pass the internal audition, that look the way a life is supposed to look, that could be presented without the mess and the doubt and the 3 a.m. dread. But the comparing mind does not know this. It processes them as evidence. Evidence that other people have figured out something you haven't. Evidence that the fullness you are missing is achievable, just not by you. And so you scroll further, measuring further, feeling further behind in a race whose finish line you can never identify because you never chose to enter it in the first place. But the most insidious comparison is not the one with others. It is the comparison with the future self you have been promising yourself, the version of you who will have things figured out, who will feel settled and whole and finally, genuinely satisfied. You have been in conversation with this future self for years, measuring the distance between where you are and where they stand. And the distance never closes, because every time you approach it, the future self moves forward, carrying the same promise. That arrival is coming, that the feeling you are looking for is just one more achievement, one more improvement, one more version of yourself away. The mirror you never put down is not showing you the truth of who you are. It is showing you the infinite gap between who you are and who you have decided you must become before you are allowed to feel at peace. And as long as you keep looking into it, you will keep finding reasons to postpone the experience of your own life. Not because your life is insufficient, but because the mirror is specifically designed to make sufficiency invisible. There is a different way of being that does not require the mirror. It is not complacency, and it is not giving up. It is the radical and difficult practice of meeting what is actually here, the life you actually have, the self you actually are right now, with something other than judgment. The discomfort you feel when you first put the mirror down is real. It is the discomfort of being with yourself without the structure of comparison to organize the experience. But beneath that discomfort, if you stay long enough, there is something else. Something quieter, something that does not need to be measured against anything else to know its own value. That is not a fantasy. That is what you find when you finally stop looking at the mirror and start looking at your life. The emotional history you carry. You did not arrive at this feeling from nowhere. The hollowness you experience now. The difficulty feeling genuinely satisfied. The sense of being slightly outside your own life. The feeling that no achievement quite reaches the place inside you that needed reaching. This did not begin when your life started going well. It began much earlier. In rooms you barely remember, with people you love. In moments so ordinary that they left no obvious mark except the one they left on how you learned to feel. On whether feeling was safe, on whether the inside of you was a place worth visiting. The research on childhood emotional neglect is striking, not because it describes dramatic abuse or visible dysfunction, but because it describes something far more common and far more invisible: the experience of having your emotional reality consistently unwitnessed. Not the child who was told that what they felt was wrong necessarily. Often simply the child whose feelings were not noticed, not mirrored, not named, not held. The child who learned, in the absence of emotional reflection, that what they felt inside was not the kind of thing that mattered, that the appropriate response to an inner experience was to process it privately, quickly, and without inconveniencing anyone. Children who grow up in environments where emotions are not acknowledged, not because of cruelty, but because the adults around them were also unequipped, also unwitnessed, also carrying their own inherited emotional gaps, develop a particular relationship with their inner life. They become skilled at functioning, remarkably, impressively skilled. They excel at the external tasks, achievement, performance, meeting expectations. And they remain quietly, confusingly disconnected from the internal experience of living. Because the internal experience was never the part that got attention. It was the behavior that was managed, the grade that was celebrated, the performance that was seen. The feeling behind all of it remained invisible. This is not about blame. The people who raised you were doing what they knew, carrying what they were given, navigating what they could. This is about understanding, because understanding the origin of a pattern is the first step toward not being unconsciously governed by it. When you can see where the disconnection was learned, you can begin to see that it is not permanent. It was not installed at birth. It was a response to an environment, and environments can change, beginning with the interior one. What this history creates in adulthood is a specific kind of relationship with fulfillment. Fulfillment begins to feel like something conditional, something you have to earn, to prove yourself worthy of, to achieve your way into. The inner child who learned that being enough meant performing enough still lives inside the adult who has performed beautifully and yet sits in the middle of their well-constructed life, feeling strangely unreachable by the satisfaction they have technically earned. The performance succeeded. The feeling never arrived, and no one told you why. The emptiness you feel is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that part of you learned very early and very thoroughly that you were not allowed to simply feel good without a reason, that rest without productivity was dangerous, that satisfaction without accomplishment was suspect, that the inside of you was a private country with no official visitors, not even yourself. The healing is not dramatic. It does not require burning down the life you have built. It begins with something far simpler and far more demanding: the willingness to start treating your own emotional experience as information rather than inconvenience. To begin asking, genuinely and without judgment, what you are actually feeling and why. To extend toward yourself the same quality of attention that was missing when you were young and needed it most. That quality of attention is not self-indulgence. It is the beginning of contact with a self that has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, to finally be heard. And when you give it that hearing, even briefly, even imperfectly, something begins to shift that no external achievement has ever been able to move. The myth of arrival. Somewhere, embedded deeply in the architecture of how you relate to your own life, there is a belief that has never been spoken aloud, but has organized everything. It goes something like this: when I get there, it will feel different. When I have the relationship, the career, the financial stability, the recognition, when I have finally put together the version of my life that meets the standard, then I will stop feeling this way. Then the hollowness will close. Then I will feel like I have arrived. Then the life I have been working toward will finally feel like the life I am actually living. This is the myth of arrival, and it is perhaps the single most effective mechanism for ensuring that you remain perpetually absent from your own experience. The myth is not obvious because it masquerades as reasonable planning. It does not feel like avoidance. It feels like ambition. It does not feel like a refusal to be present. It feels like a commitment to something better. You are not running away from now, the myth tells you. You are running toward then. And then will be worth it. Then will feel the way now never quite manages to. The myth is patient. It does not argue. It simply keeps the horizon moving, always just far enough ahead to justify one more sprint. But the nature of then is that it always becomes now. Every future moment you have placed your hope in has eventually arrived, and when it did, it was here, present, imperfect, ordinary, subject to the same quality of consciousness you brought to every other present moment. And that quality of consciousness, organized entirely around what is still missing, what is still ahead, what has not yet been achieved, that consciousness could not receive the moment it arrived in, because it was already focused on the next then. The arrival happened. The feeling of arrival never did. The cost of the myth of arrival is not abstract. It is the specific, irreplaceable texture of your actual life, experienced at a distance. It is the conversation you were in but not fully present for, the achievement you minimized before it could matter, the relationship you could not fully inhabit because part of you was always elsewhere, planning, projecting, measuring the distance to then. Life does not wait for arrival. It is already happening. It has been happening the entire time, in the spaces between your plans for it. And the tragedy is not that you missed it. The tragedy would be continuing to. There is a difference between presence and passivity. Presence does not mean abandoning your goals or making peace with circumstances that genuinely need to change. It means allowing the moments you are actually in to have weight. It means letting what is good right now be good right now, rather than filing it as insufficient evidence of a future state. It means discovering, perhaps for the first time, what your life actually feels like when you stop experiencing it from a distance, not a managed, curated, performance-ready version of your life. The actual one. The one happening in this body, in this moment, with all of its imperfection and uncertainty and irreversible, unrepeatable presence. The thing you are waiting to feel when you finally arrive. The sense of ease, of rightness, of being genuinely where you are. That feeling is not located in the future. It has never been located in the future. It is a quality of relationship with the present moment, and it is available to you right now in this exact life, before you have changed a single external thing. Not because the circumstances are perfect, because you are finally here. And here, it turns out, is the only place the feeling you have been chasing was ever actually waiting. What you actually need and were never told. For decades, psychologists assumed that well-being was primarily a product of circumstances, that if a person's external life reached a sufficient level of comfort, safety, and achievement, internal satisfaction would follow. The research eventually forced a different conclusion. Circumstance accounts for a surprisingly small percentage of long-term well-being. What accounts for the rest is something far less visible, far less measurable, and far less frequently discussed in any conversation about how to build a good life. And the fact that it is so rarely discussed is, in itself, part of the problem. What the research consistently points to is this. Human beings flourish when three fundamental psychological needs are consistently met. The need for autonomy, the sense that your choices are genuinely yours, that you are living from the inside out rather than performing a role assigned to you from the outside in. The need for competence and not achievement for its own sake, but the experience of growing, of mastering things that matter to you, of applying your capacity to something that feels genuinely meaningful. And the need for genuine connection, not social presence, not networking, not the comfort of being liked, but the specific and irreplaceable experience of being truly known by another person, not the version of you that performs well. The version of you that doubts and aches and does not always have the answer. When these three needs are met, something happens that external circumstances alone cannot produce. A baseline sense of aliveness. Not euphoria, not constant happiness, but a quiet, stable feeling of being genuinely engaged with your own existence. Of mattering, in the deepest and most personal sense of the word. Of being, at the cellular level, at home. This is not a mystical state. It is a documented psychological condition that is entirely achievable, and that most people never experience because they spend their lives pursuing the wrong things with tremendous discipline and skill. Most people reading this will recognize, with a specific and uncomfortable clarity, which of these needs have been chronically unmet. The person who has built a successful career in a field chosen for security rather than meaning has competence without autonomy. The person who is surrounded by people but known by no one has social presence without genuine connection. The person who has followed every external instruction about how to build a good life has achievement without the experience of self-authorship. In every case, the surface looks fine, and beneath the surface, the hunger persists. The truth is that you were never taught to identify these needs, let alone to build a life around meeting them. You were taught to pursue outcomes, titles, incomes, relationships, possessions, and told that the feelings would follow. They don't, reliably, because outcomes address the surface while these needs live at the core. And the core, unattended, will always find a way to make itself heard. The emptiness you feel is one of the ways it is speaking. The restlessness, the numbness, the hollow satisfaction after a goal is reached, all of it is the core asking for something that the surface cannot provide. What would it mean to make a choice this week? Not a grand, life-altering choice, but a small, specific one, from genuine autonomy. Not because it is practical, not because it is approved of, not because it fits the plan, but because it is true to something real inside you? What would it feel like to have a conversation in which you are genuinely honest rather than strategically appropriate? What would it mean to pursue one thing, even briefly, simply because it makes you feel alive? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the beginning of the interior renovation that no external circumstance has ever been able to perform for you. The renovation does not begin with grand gestures. It begins with a single, honest choice, and then another, and then another, until the life you are living begins, slowly and irreversibly, to feel like yours. The voice you stopped listening to. There is a moment early in most people's lives when the authentic inner voice and the voice of external expectation begin to diverge. It happens gradually, almost invisibly. A choice is made based on what will be approved rather than what is true. A feeling is suppressed because it is inconvenient. A desire is dismissed because it does not fit the map. And the authentic voice, the deep, pre-verbal knowing that has always been there, receives the message clearly. You are not what is being listened to here. You are not what matters here. What matters here is what works, what is appropriate, what keeps things smooth and moving forward. So it goes quieter. Not silent. The authentic self does not go silent, but it learns to speak in frequencies that require real stillness to hear. It speaks in the sudden, inexplicable certainty that a particular path is wrong, in the flash of aliveness that appears when you are doing something you were not scheduled to care about, in the persistent, low-level discomfort of a life that fits perfectly by every external standard, but leaves you with the feeling that you are somehow wearing someone else's clothes, in the inexplicable sadness that arrives on evenings that should feel peaceful, in the restlessness that surfaces whenever the performance pauses long enough for something real to have a chance of breaking through. Most people have learned to override this voice so consistently that they have almost completely lost access to it. Not because they are dishonest, but because the world is very loud and very persistent, and the authentic voice is neither. It does not argue. It does not insist. It simply keeps speaking in the quietest register available to it, and waits for a moment of stillness that may or may not come. And in the meantime, you make the decisions that make sense. You follow the path that is visible. You do what you are supposed to do. And somewhere beneath all of it, something patient and irreducible keeps waiting for you to notice it. The modern world is architecturally designed to prevent that stillness. There is always a notification, always a task, always a reason to fill the silence before the silence can say anything. And what the silence would say, if given the chance, is precisely what the noise is working so hard to drown out. That the life you are living and the self who is supposed to be living it are not fully the same person. That there is more to you than what has been expressed. That the path forward is not another achievement, but a different kind of listening. A listening that is not passive. That requires courage. Because what the authentic voice says is not always what the structured, approved, performance-ready version of your life wants to hear. Reconnecting with the authentic inner voice does not require a retreat. a crisis, or a dramatic act of self-reinvention. It requires something simpler and more frightening, the willingness to be still long enough to hear something that might change what you think you want. Because what you think you want has been shaped profoundly and continuously by what you were told to want. And beneath that layer, beneath the approved desires and the inherited goals and the performed preferences, there is a self with a very different set of answers to the question of what a life well lived might look like. That self is not a stranger. You have felt it. In the moments that surprised you with their beauty, in the choices that felt inexplicably right even when they couldn't be logically justified, in the rare, unguarded conversations that left you feeling, briefly, completely known. That is not a fantasy self or an impossible ideal. That is the self that has been trying to reach you, through every hollow ache and every moment of inexplicable dissatisfaction, for as long as you have been performing a life instead of living one. It has not given up on you. It does not know how to give up on you. It is, in the most precise sense, who you are, and it is still here, waiting for you to stop and listen. Rebuilding from the inside. There is a particular fantasy about transformation that most people carry without examining it. The fantasy goes like this. One day something will shift dramatically. A realization will arrive with such force that everything will become clear. The old patterns will fall away. The new self will emerge, fully formed, free from the confusion and the emptiness and the exhausting performance of being someone you are not quite sure you are. Transformation in this fantasy is an event. Something that happens to you, rather than something you participate in daily, in ways that are too small to feel significant until they suddenly, undeniably, are. The truth is less cinematic and far more powerful. Real transformation is not an event. It is a direction, a consistent daily choice to turn slightly more toward honesty and slightly less toward performance. To ask, in small and specific moments, what you actually feel rather than what you are supposed to feel. To make one choice this week from genuine values rather than inherited obligation. To allow one conversation to be real rather than appropriate. To sit, for 5 minutes, with the discomfort of your own inner life, without immediately reaching for something to fill the silence. Transformation at this level does not look like anything from the outside. But inside, over time, it changes the texture of everything. The rebuilding that is being invited here is not about dismantling the life you have constructed. It is about changing the relationship you have with it. The career does not have to end for you to begin asking whether it is expressing who you actually are. The relationship does not have to dissolve for you to begin showing up in it with more honesty. The daily routine does not have to be abandoned for you to begin inserting, one small moment at a time, the things that make you feel genuinely alive. The architecture of your life does not need to be demolished. It needs an interior renovation, one that begins not with action but with awareness, with the willingness to see what is actually there before deciding what to do about it. What this requires, above anything else, is a willingness to tolerate the discomfort of your own truth. Because when you start making choices from genuine values rather than from the need for approval, not everyone will be comfortable with it. Some people have a deep investment in the version of you that performs reliably, that meets expectations without complication, that is available and accommodating and predictable. The move toward authenticity will disappoint some of them. That disappointment is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that something real is happening. It is the natural friction of a life beginning to align with the self who is actually living it. The most radical act available to you is not the dramatic, visible one. It is the interior one. The choice to take your own inner life seriously. To treat your own emotional experience as data rather than noise. To stop for one moment each day, the forward momentum of obligation and performance, and simply ask, what is actually true for me right now? Not what should be true, not what would be convenient to be true. What is actually, honestly, undeniably true? That question, asked consistently and answered honestly, is the beginning of a different kind of life. Not a perfect life. Not a life free from difficulty or uncertainty or pain. A life that, for the first time, feels like it belongs to you. A life you are not watching from a slight distance, managing and performing and waiting to feel. A life you are actually in, present, uncertain, imperfect, and real. That is not a compromise. That is the thing you have been looking for. And it does not require you to become someone different. It requires you to become, more fully and more honestly, who you already are. The emptiness was the message. You came to this video feeling something that most people spend enormous energy trying not to feel. The quiet, persistent, inexplicable sense that something is missing. Even when nothing is missing, even when life is going well, even when every external measure says that you have done enough and arrived far enough and become sufficient enough to finally feel at peace. You came here with that feeling, and you were probably hoping in some part of yourself that you would leave it behind. That the right words, the right explanation, the right reframe would finally dissolve it. That you would finish watching and feel, for the first time in a long time, that the inside of you matched the outside of your life. You will not leave it behind, but you will leave this video understanding it differently. And that difference is everything. The emptiness was never a malfunction. It was never evidence of ingratitude or weakness, or the particular brokenness you suspected in yourself during the 3 a.m. hours when it was loudest. It was a message, one of the clearest and most honest communications your inner life has ever sent you. A message that was written not in the language of logic or performance or external validation, but in the only language the deepest part of you knows how to speak, the language of feeling. And like all important messages, it was not designed to be comfortable. It was designed to be heard. What was it saying? It was saying that the life being lived on the surface and the life waiting to be lived in depth are not the same life. It was saying that the self being performed and the self waiting to be inhabited are not the same self. It was saying, in the only way available to it, that you have been building a life for an audience, and it is time, it is past time, to begin building one for yourself. Not a life that looks good. A life that feels true. Not a life that earns approval. A life that earns your own presence. Your own full, honest, unguarded attention. This is not a call to abandon everything and start over. It is a call to something far more demanding and far more sustainable. The daily, interior practice of telling yourself the truth. Of asking what is real and then listening for the answer without immediately editing it into something more acceptable. Of treating your own aliveness and your own genuine, specific, irreplaceable sense of what it feels like to be you as the most important thing you are responsible for cultivating. Not because it is self-indulgent, because it is the only thing that makes everything else real. Every relationship deepens when you are genuinely present in it. Every achievement carries weight when it is connected to something you actually value. Every ordinary moment becomes livable when you are actually in it. The achievements are real. The relationships are real. The life you have built contains genuinely beautiful things. None of that is the problem. The problem was the frame. The belief that those things were supposed to be enough on their own, without the interior dimension that gives them weight and meaning, and the quality of being actually lived, rather than merely executed. With that dimension restored, even partially, even imperfectly, even just beginning, everything changes. Not the circumstances, the experience of the circumstances. And that, it turns out, is what a life actually is. You are not broken. You have never been broken. You are operating on incomplete information about what a human life requires in order to feel whole. Now you have slightly more, not because of anything that was solved or fixed in this video, but because the emptiness you brought to it, the one you were afraid to look at directly, turned out, when you finally looked, to contain something you did not expect. Not an absence. A direction. Not a wound without meaning. A compass. Pointing not toward a different life, but toward a different relationship with the life you are already living. The life that feels genuinely yours does not begin when everything is finally arranged correctly. It begins at the exact moment you decide to stop living at a distance from yourself. It begins when you stop waiting for arrival and start inhabiting where you actually are. It begins in the next moment you tell yourself the truth, the small, daily, uncelebrated truth of who you are and what you actually feel and what, Beneath all the noise and the performance and the expectation, you have always, quietly, been reaching for. That moment is not somewhere ahead of you. It is now. It has always been now. And you, all of you, including the part that still aches and still searches and still does not quite have the words, you are more than enough to begin.